Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from Rouse IAS.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC examination. Today we are going to take up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 13th of August 2020. The articles which we are going to cover today are displayed on the screen. Let's now begin the discussion. Here is an important announcement. In our weekly series of mains question assignment from DNS, the question for today's assignment is, even though being well-intentioned, the three-language formula has failed to deliver the results, elaborate. The question is of 10 marks and needs to be answered in 150 words. This question has been created from the DNS dated 5th of August 2020 from the discussion titled Language of Unity Challenges to Three-Language Formula. You may watch the discussion before writing your answer. However, there are few important things that you must follow. You can type the answer in the comment box, or you can click the image or the JPG file and send your answers to us. All those who will send the answers by Saturday will get the evaluation and the feedback from Rouse IAS teachers. Post your answers in the portrait mode only. And also you should not post your answers in someone else's answers. Use the comment or post your answer at the bottom of the thread to submit your answer to the main thread, and it should not appear as commenting on someone else's answers. Also, you should try to keep a tab on time taken. Mention the time you take to write your answer on the top. You can also mention the city and state where you are posting your answers from. This is important because it will help us in knowing that DNS is reaching every nook and corner of our country. In the description of the video, there is a link for the question assignment where you can participate in the discussion on Rouse IAS eLearn platform. So the process of election for the President of United States of America has already started. And in this regard, two articles appear in today's newspaper. Number one is Kamala Harris to be Biden's running mate appears on page number 1. And the next article appears in the form of column on editorial page, that is A Running Mate Matters. Both these articles highlight the significance of Kamala Harris being nominated by Joe Biden as his running mate. Now every 4 years, for the period of 6 to 8 months, newspaper extensively cover this process of elections for the post of President of United States of America. And in order to understand and comprehend these news articles, it is very important that we first understand the whole process and procedure of the election. Not only is it important from the point of view of general awareness, but also from the perspective of prelims as well as mains examination it is important. Because you should know that in GS2, there is this particular line which requires us to understand not only the Constitution of India, but major differences between Indian Constitution and those of other major constitutions. Being the oldest democracy across the world, it is our responsibility to understand the process of election of the President of United States. Okay, so let's begin and try and understand this whole process. So now as far as the whole process is concerned, it is divided into two parts. First, you have to become the candidate of your own party. So you might get confused. For example, in India, how does a person becomes the prime ministerial or chief ministerial candidate? His or her name just has to be announced by the party president or the high command. But in US, it is quite different. A person has to win the nomination from amongst the registered party voters across the country and all the states. And once you become party nominee, or once you become the candidate of your own party, then you fight for the position of the president, and then the actual elections begin. So these two different processes have been tabulated in the left as well as the right. So let us say that there are two major political parties in United States, A and B. And in both these cases, three candidates have declared or have expressed their views of running for the post of presidentship. And these are A1, A2, A3 from blue party and B1, B2, B3 from red party. Now through the process described in the left column, one of the three candidates out of A will become the party candidate for party A, and one of the person out of these three will become the candidate for the party B, or which is the red party. And then finally, the final contest for the post of election will happen between A and B. So the process of nomination of a party candidate is done by primaries and caucuses. Then these two candidates go through a process of electoral college to become the president of United States. So let us begin by first understanding the basic requirements for filing nomination for the post of president of United States. There are three conditions. The first is that she should be a natural born citizen of United States of America. Now in this, all those people born to American parents but outside of United States of America are also included, and they are considered naturally born citizens of United States of America. Then she should be a resident of United States of America for at least 14 years immediately preceding the elections, and she should be at least of the age of 35 years old. So these are the three conditions which you need to satisfy in order to contest the elections. So once you have done that, then that person expresses her opinion to her own party to contest elections. And here the intra-party democracy comes into play. So now here it is very, very important to understand that this is a best case demonstration of intra-party democracy. So a person, just by his or her influence on top party echelons, does not become a party candidate. That person has to earn and win the nomination of the party. And for that, the methods of primaries and caucuses are adopted. And for that purpose, we'll again go back to the same example. So in United States, just like in any other democracy, both the parties, blue and red, maintain the list of registered party voters across all the states in America. So let's consider this particular state. It will have some blue registered voters, and it will also have some registered voters which belong to party red. So if a person wants to become the candidate for party blue, she has to go to all the blue voters across all the states and win their confidence. And similarly, if you want to become the candidate of red party, you will have to go to all the states in America and scout for the confidence and support of all the voters. And these are called primaries because they are primary level of election. And this process also makes sense, right? Because if you want to become the president of the United States, which means that you want to represent whole of United States of America, you first need to convince the supporters of your own party, right? Because there may be many people who want to be the president of USA. And each of these people may have their own ideas about how the US government should work. And hence, before going out contesting for presidential elections, you should first convince your own party workers and members across the country. So what happens in the primaries is that all these three people from blue party as well as three people from red party will go to all the states and they will ask for support. Once they have done that, each state conducts voting separately for both the parties. What happens in those elections is that local registered voters come and choose the delegates. Now these delegates are not A1, A2, A3, but these delegates are local people who promise to the voters that if you elect me, I will go to the national convention of the blue party and vote for A1. And similarly from the other party, the delegates will promise their voters that if you vote for me, I will go to the national convention of the red party and vote for the candidate B2. And similarly, all the elections are held across all the states. And there are two ways or methods through which these elections are conducted, and those are named as primaries and caucuses. So primaries are state level elections where party members vote, and this method is followed by 34 states across United States out of 50. Whereas caucuses are more like a local meeting, again party members vote, and these are followed by 16 states. The major difference between the primaries and caucuses is that primaries are run by the state governments, whereas caucuses are run by individual parties, separately for blue and Similarly for red. So the primary elections are run by state and local governments, while caucuses are private events that are directly run by the political parties themselves. The method of primary is more like a direct voting, whereas at caucuses, individuals who are viewed favorably within the party are identified as potential delegates, and after a comprehensive discussion and debate, an informal vote is held to determine which individual will serve as delegate at the National Party Convention. So after the primaries and caucuses have been held, all the states have selected their delegates. The blue voters have selected their blue delegates, the red voters have selected their red delegates, and all these delegates from across the country meet at the national convention of the party. So blue delegates from across the country will gather at the convention of the blue party, and similarly the delegates chosen by the red voters across the country will gather at the national convention of the red party, and it is here that they cast their vote, and ultimately it is decided that who is going to become the presidential candidate for each party. So at the national conventions, party's nomination is formally announced, and it is here that presidential candidate also chooses a running mate who ultimately becomes the vice president if this person manages to become the president. And this is where the Joe Biden has already announced Kamala Harris as his running mate, although she is not a candidate for vice president so far. So far Joe Biden is not the presidential candidate for Democratic Party. But unless and until this national convention is held for the Democratic Party, neither he will be called a presidential candidate nor Kamala Harris will be called a vice presidential candidate. So I hope so far the process of nomination from each party is clear. And let us now move on to that stage where the actual election process is held. So let's say that after the processes of primaries and caucuses, A1 and B2, A1 from the blue party and B2 from the red party, have emerged as the candidates of their respective parties. And hence finally either of the two will become the president of the USA. But that shall be determined by Electoral College. So first and foremost, you should understand that Electoral College is a process and not a place. It's a method through which the president is finally elected. So the Electoral College process consists of selection of electors, the meeting of electors where they vote for the president and vice president, and the counting of the electoral votes by the Congress. Don't worry, these things are written over here. So first and foremost, how many electors are there? And how are they distributed among each states? So the Electoral College for the President of United States of America consists of 538 electors. A majority of 270 electoral vote is required to elect the president. So each states in United States of America have certain set of electors which are elected by the voters from each state. You can compare this with the primary process. The difference in that case was, in that case, the electors were elected by the party members themselves. But now, since this is an election for president post now, all the voters, all the registered voters, irrespective of the party, choose their electors. So overall, the United States of America has 538 electors. So each presidential candidate again in the second round also goes across all the states and requests the voters to choose the electors which will ultimately support B2 or A1 in their cases. And finally, after the general elections, the meeting of the electors take place on the first Monday after the second Wednesday in the December, and the electors meet in their respective states where they cast their votes for the president and vice president on separate ballots. And the person who gets more than 270 votes becomes the president of United States of America. So the process of Electoral College is the process through which the electors are selected, which then ultimately elect the president and vice president. It is done at a meeting of electors held in their own states, and the counting of the electoral vote is done by the Congress. There is no election commission in case of United States of America, and Electoral College is not a place where they sit together. It's just a name of a process. And you should remember that it is a kind of compromise between two different kinds of elections of president. The one way is where the Congress would have directly elected the president with its own members. And the second way would have been to elect a president through direct voting across all the country. And you can understand that this is somewhere in between. First, people elect their representatives who then elect the president. So I hope with this process it is clear to you that how the president of United States of America is elected. Just keep in mind that there are two processes. The first process is the primaries and caucuses, in which the representatives of the parties elect the party's candidates, and then these two candidates go through the actual election through the process of electoral college, where the electoral college is constituted by representatives from all the states, which finally elects the president of United States of America. Now coming to the question which can be asked in the mains as well as prelims examination. Since you have understood the manner in which the president of USA is elected, and it is expected of you to know by this time that how the president of India is elected, go through both of them and try to compare the uniqueness or the differences among these two processes. Let's now move on to the next news. So this particular article, study finds poor access to abortion drugs, appears on page number 10. Now a study has been conducted among 1500 chemists in 6 states by Foundation for Reproductive Health Services India, which has indicated a severe shortage of medical abortion drugs in 5 out of 6 states. And major reason given by the agency for the shortage of these drugs is the emphasis of the government on Beti Bachao Beti Padhao campaign, because according to this agency, it has hindered access to safe, legal and cost-effective abortion. So we should utilize this opportunity to analyze the overall framework of Beti Bachao Beti Padhao. Because in UPSC mains, especially in GS2 papers, various schemes and their analysis have already been asked in the past. Beti Bachao Beti Padhao is one of the most important scheme currently being run for the girl child. And hence it is important for us to look at the main features, issues as well as how we can improve upon those issues. But before we delve into this particular scheme, it is important to first learn the types of violences against women and girls through a life cycle approach. And this life cycle stage is all about dividing a person's life into 5 different parts: pre-birth, infancy, adolescence, reproductive age and elderly stage. And let us understand how women face various kinds of issues in the life cycle. So starting with pre-birth. So the first challenge is presented to girls even before they are born to defend their rights, and that is through sex-selective abortions. Then comes the infancy stage. All those who survive through this particular stage reach infancy, where they face female infanticide and they also face gross neglect as far as their health and nutrition is concerned. They are often discriminated, especially in those cases where they have an elder boy or male sibling. And then comes the adolescent stage, where the neglect of healthcare as well as nutrition in terms of food continues to be with them, but another aspect is added, which is the gross neglect of education. If you have a look at the gender distribution of the gross enrollment ratio, you'll always find those tilted in the favor of males. And then of course another aspect gets added, especially in a developing country like India, which is of early marriage or child marriage. Now moving on to the reproductive age. We started with the neglect of healthcare, nutrition, we added education, but as soon as the woman reaches the age where she can participate in economy in a fruitful way, the most important neglect now becomes that of employment. And wherever women are employed, they are employed out of necessity and not out of preference. And in the healthcare, a special feature is added, that is now the reproductive health becomes most important. And that is also the most neglected aspect of women healthcare. Along with that, domestic violence gets added to the issues faced by women in the reproductive age. And then finally in the elderly stage, again, healthcare and nutrition are often ignored, and especially since she has always been dependent on her partner and children, the economic dependence of an elderly woman on her family especially worsens the situation. So these are the issues which women face throughout their life. Now this does not mean that all women across the country are facing all these issues. few are lucky and they don't face any of these issues at any phases of their life. But these are the general challenges and roadblocks in the way of women empowerment or development. And hence the government has made a lot of laws and schemes and policies to protect women at various stages of these life cycles. And the Beti Bachao Beti Padhao scheme is particularly focused in this pre-birth, infancy and up to some extent early adolescence also. So the scheme which we'll now discuss focuses on early part of the girl's life. So after having understood the life cycle approach, it's time for us to focus on the child sex ratio issue. The country, although has witnessed advancement in various fields and even though the literacy rate amongst women has shown an improvement, century-old customs and traditions which are biased against girl child still prevail in large parts of the country. And that can be easily shown with the help of data. If you focus on this left side chart, you can easily see that how the child sex ratio has continuously declined since 1951. Although this is contrary to the observation about overall sex ratio, which has improved since 1991, but the child sex ratio has declined, and in 2011 census, the child sex ratio stood at 918, contrary to overall sex ratio which was 943. And you can easily understand that it's just a matter of time when this 918 gets reflected in the overall sex ratio, bringing it down further. So this is the national child sex ratio. But that doesn't mean that scenario is such in all the districts and states of our country. Now is the time to focus on the chart on the right hand side, which focuses on child sex ratio plotted in a district wide manner. You can see all the districts and you can see various kinds of colors on your screen. So the greener the color, the better is the child sex ratio, whereas the color towards the brown and red indicates the worst child sex ratio. And you can see the districts plotted with brown color, and all these have child sex ratio less than or equal to 850, which is pathetic. So just like anything else in India, the distribution of child sex ratio is also very, very disparate. The eastern, northeastern and southern region of the country has a very, very favorable child sex ratio, whereas the northern and northwestern region of our country has very, very low child sex ratio. This has cast a shadow on the progress of overall country. So we can say that the major paradox of our society is that the girl child is being denied the right to survive. It is a matter of great concern that gender bias sex selective elimination still continues in many parts of our country. And the problem of declining sex ratio is not an isolated phenomenon, because it indicates overall low status of women and girl child in our society. And hence, the government of India came up with a campaign, Beti Bachao Beti Padhao, in 2014 and 15 to address the issue of declining child sex ratio. So this scheme focuses on three objectives. First, it strives to improve overall child sex ratio. It also will promote importance of girl child, and it will also highlight the benefits of educating the girls. And it will do so by focusing on 100 districts. Now you can easily understand that from where does these 100 districts come from. Since the problem of child sex ratio is not national, it's local, regional, distributed mainly in the north and northwestern region of our country, and hence it makes sense to focus on these districts. And the emphasis of the overall scheme or the campaign will be about awareness creation or Information, Education and Communication IEC campaign. So not only did the government launch this scheme, it also set monitorable targets. Because in order to evaluate, you must measure, just like your mains answer writing practice. And hence, the quantitative monitorable targets set by the government were two. The first was to increase the sex ratio at birth or CRB in gender critical districts by 10 points on an annual basis, or that is per year. So to start with, in 2015, if the child sex ratio at birth was 850, by the end of that year it should be 860. And the second monitorable target was improve girls' enrollment in secondary education from 76% in 2013-14 to 79% by 2017. So now it has been around 5 years since the scheme is functional. And according to Controller and Auditor General of India state reports, the scheme has not been able to achieve its objectives. CAG report on social, general and economic sectors on this particular scheme in Haryana and Punjab presents a very grim picture, according to which sex ratio has declined in some districts. And there are two such examples. One of them is Panipat, which is a district in Haryana, where the sex ratio was 892 in 2014-15, which has dropped to 881 in 2019. Whereas the target was 902 in 2017-18. So now you can understand in 4 years, it should have been in the range of 920 to 930, whereas it has gone in the other direction. Similarly, the latest data from 2017 Sample Registration System Survey found that India's sex ratio at birth is worsening. In 2015 to 17, there were 896 female born for every 1,000 males, which was in itself a 10 years low. Now, one of the possible reasons behind this could be the falling fertility rates, which are associated with worsening sex ratios. Because when parents decide or choose to have fewer and fewer babies, their preference for male child keeps on increasing. As you know that Beti Bachao Beti Padhao is purely restricted to awareness creation. But we can already understand that addressing gender inequality requires a multi-pronged approach. And hence, there is excessive expenditure on communication related activities as compared to multi-sector interventions focused on education and health. Then there are, of course, just like any other scheme, funds related issues as well. First and foremost is that it is constrained by resources. If you look at the budget allocations, 220 crores were allotted to this scheme in 2020 budget, which comes out to be around 2 crore per priority districts. Then even though the fund allocation is low, that allocated smaller fund is even not utilized, and hence underutilization of funds is a major problem. For example, out of 43 crore which was allocated for this scheme in 2016, only 5 crore of amounts were properly used. And this is the data which was submitted to Parliamentary Standing Committee on Human Resource Development. And then of course, diversion of funds is a major problem, which basically means that the fund have not been utilized for the purpose they were meant for. And a case study is that in Panipat, rupees 5 lakh in 2016-17, which was the total amount received in that year, was spent in preparation of a theme gate at the town's entrance to mark the launching of this particular scheme. So this is the kind of expenditure which was incurred in that particular year. Then of course there are issues related to PCPNDT Acts and its implementation. So PCPNDT, or Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act 1994, is an act of parliament which was enacted to stop female feticides and arrest the declining sex ratio in India. The act banned prenatal sex determination. But there are various clauses which were supposed to be implemented under this scheme, and it was promised that the government will overlook whether these provisions are being implemented or not. And one of them was launching of anonymous online complaint portal against various medical facilities which the local people feel is carrying out sex selective abortion and detection. To your utter dismay, none of the gender critical districts in Haryana have an anonymous online complaint portal as of now. As per the scheme's guideline, district PCPNDT cells were to be strengthened with technical manpower and equipment, but still no action has been initiated to strengthen the PCPNDT cells, and no specific targets have been mentioned in the guideline itself with respect to conducting inspections of diagnostic centers. The guidelines state that field inspections and monitoring is to be carried out every 3 months in all districts by the State Inspection and Monitoring Committee. It was noted that against the requirement of 5 meetings, only 1 meeting was held in 2015 and 16. So these are the major issues with Beti Bachao Beti Padhao, and hence there is a need to work on it. First, we need to increase planned expenditure allocation for education, health related intervention, as opposed to current focus only on awareness related activities. Then, district level task force should be headed by local female frontline workers like women members of panchayat, Anganwadi workers, female health workers, and female school teachers. These people should find their places in the important committees, and hence 100% implementation of the PCPNDT Act, especially with respect to those three features, should be ensured on the ground level. So from the perspective of mains examination, always keep in mind this life cycle approach. This will help you address all the issues related to women, whether in essay or in GS mains papers. Try to keep in mind this graph as well as this map. Once you draw a map, you can simply shade the region of Northwest indicating low sex ratio and shade this region with a different shading and say high child sex ratio, like that. Let's now move on to the next news. The article A Self-Reliant Foreign Policy appears on page number 7. And this article highlights that in the present and upcoming era of new Cold War, which is basically between China and United States, India, rather than picking any particular side or even one side, should diversify its relation with important and significant players in the international arena, which will ensure India's strategic autonomy. And that is the policy which is best suited for India. And what article does is that it takes instances from the past of India's foreign policy to explain that India has historically prided itself as an independent developing country which does not take orders or succumbs to pressures from great powers, and in the past has ensured its own strategic economy and functioning of international and foreign policy in the interest which has always suited India. And the best substantiation of this fact comes from India's policy during the Cold War time. As you know that most countries across the world had taken sides in the Cold War era. But India spearheaded the movement which came to be known as non-alignment movement. It did not join any power bloc because joining of power bloc meant a certain level of commitment, and it also at the same time meant doing or carrying out certain activities which might not be in the best interest of your own country. And hence, India decided to go on its own path, and it took all the decisions which were based on needs and circumstances of our own country. And for that, India took help from both USA as well as then USSR. For example, during the China War, that is in 1962, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the best and the biggest advocate of non-alignment himself, had appealed to United States for emergency military aid to counter the Chinese threat and invasion. Although no one can deny the fact that this particular decision went against the ideology of non-alignment movement. But it was in India's best and sovereign interest to ally with US at that crucial juncture when China was standing at India's eastern corridors. Similarly, during Kargil War, when it appeared that this war might stretch beyond June and July, United States started fearing a nuclear Armageddon in Southeast Asia, which would have been disastrous to everyone. And hence, United States of America started building pressure on Pakistan, threatening intervention. And India wholeheartedly and openly welcomed such US pressures and threats on Pakistan. So this is as far as USA goes. What about USSR? Now, in the build-up of 1971 war with Pakistan, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi entered into a treaty of peace with Soviet Union. By signing this treaty, India did not lose its strategic autonomy. Rather, India ensured freedom of Bangladesh, sovereignty and territorial integrity of our own country by maneuvering the great power equations in favor of India. So the study of India's foreign policy indicates two things. No one can claim that India did not align. In fact, India did align itself with various powers. But those alignments were always to make sure that they are in the interest of our own country. Then if you move to the present, what you see in the present time is that China has again threatened our borders along Galwan. And it has done so repeatedly in past 5 to 10 years. And hence it makes sense to align ourselves strategically with the interests of United States. But that should be done without formally entering into any military alliance with them. And in a short while, we'll understand why. But at the same time, if you consider another global power, although not equivalent to US and China, but third after these two, India has ensured warm relation with that of Russia. Although due to increasing closeness with that of United States of America, the warmth in India-Russia relationship is definitely going down, but still India and Russia are in good terms. For example, recently India made an outreach to Moscow, knowing its closeness with China. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh participated in Russia-India-China trilateral partnership, and an important aspect of trilateral talk was Mr. Jaishankar's comment where he said that India should also seek to build coalitions with middle powers such as European Union, Japan and Russia. Then India is also viewing to be part of Moscow's Greater European Partnership, which is a geopolitical concept unveiled by President Vladimir Putin 4 years ago. And if you try to recall, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Eurasian Economic Union, and Russia-India-China trilateral are all a part of that, being formulated and supported by both Russia as well as China. And in this regard, we would like to bring in few key points of Mr. S. Jaishankar's speech, in which he focused on 3 issues and which seems like governing India's foreign policy currently. According to him, non-alignment is a concept of past which belonged to a unique situation of Cold War era, and the current Cold War, or you can say Cold War 2.0 between China and United States, offer a very different kinds of possibilities as well as challenges for India. Because in the earlier times, the two world powers which were in conflict, which were USSR and USA, both of them were not adjacent to India. But in the current Cold War 2.0, China shares a long borders with India. He also mentioned and insisted on USA that it's time that USA should start believing in equality, and sooner or later it should think of participating actively in various kinds of multilateral arrangements. Rather than maligning them, US should take active participation, because it's in the best interest of United States of America itself that the current global institutions, for example United Nations, WTO and alike, remain credible, because after all they were created and supported and also perpetuated because of the support given by US. Now US has given up on these institutions is another matter, but it's in the best interest that the global community still considers these organizations as credible, because if it doesn't, then Russia and China are just waiting for them to collapse so that they can fill that void with their own particular international organization, and the best example is AIIB itself. And finally, S. Jaishankar highlighted that India should not enter into any kind of hardcore military alliance with United States, whatever may be the threat. And as we have discussed, this is because of the peculiar situation where India shares long and disputed border with China, and China is very powerful, and in those circumstances India will lose its own strategic economy and will become a tool in the hand of America. And hence the author suggests diversification, because in the backdrop where United States has started to confront China frontally and head on, India should have US support, and also at the same time India should ensure its independence. This is important because India should avoid relying on only United States to counter China, because then it will constrict or restrict India's options in other theaters of national interest, such as its ties with Iran and Russia and efforts to speed up indigenous defense modernization. Don't worry, the writers on foreign relations often use such intricate language, but basically what author wants to say is that you want S-400 from Russia. At the same time, you want F-16 and various kinds of helicopters and innumerable other defense equipments from USA. As soon as you enter into alliance with USA, you are going to lose S-400, which is right now the most advanced missile defense system. So the diversification which has been the past should be the present as well as the future, according to the author. The next article, Shutting the Door on Huawei, appears on page number 7. So in January, UK allowed Huawei to have a limited role in its telecommunications network. However, after review, UK has finally decided to ban the Chinese company. This entails banning UK mobile providers from buying new Huawei 5G equipment after the end of this particular year, as well as removing all of Huawei's 5G kit from their networks by 2027. So UK has decided to totally get rid of Huawei and its equipments. Already you know that US sanctions imposed on Huawei has created uncertainty around Huawei's supply chain. The UK can no longer be confident that Huawei will be able to guarantee the security of the future 5G equipments. Not just UK, there are plethora of countries which have taken stern action against this particular Chinese company. And it seems like a domino effect. And we will see all of them. For example, the US government has banned Huawei from the country's network and has advised UK, Australia, New Zealand as well as Canada to do the same. The reasons given by US is that Huawei as a company shares close contact with the Chinese government and hence this closeness could be a threat to other countries. Just last December, Huawei's chief financial officer Meng Wanzhou was arrested by Canadian authorities at the request of United States, with which of course it has an extradition treaty. An year ago, which is in 2018, Australian government banned Huawei and ZTE from supplying telecom equipment for 5G network, again citing national security concern. In November last year, New Zealand's security services too blocked Huawei. Similarly, France has also decided to limit the use of Huawei's 5G kit. Germany too is reducing its reliance on this Chinese company and its products. And hence for Huawei it can be said that a domino effect across Europe might pose a serious challenge given that almost a quarter of its sales come from European markets. So now the question arises that why these developed countries are taking such stern action against this Chinese company. And the reason for that can be segregated into 3 parts. The first is that everyone knows close ties which this particular company shares with the communist China. It was founded by an engineer who has earlier worked with the PLA and is also a member of the Communist Party of China. A famous journalist, Mr. Richard McGregor, has claimed that Huawei has received state support at crucial points in its development, and hence the allegations by United States that the closer ties of Communist China with that Huawei cannot be denied. The second important reason is national security risk due to hidden backdoors in the softwares. For example, there are a large set of concerns related to a perceived security risk. For example, a report by Bloomberg in 2009 and 11 stated that Vodafone had identified hidden backdoors in the software that could have given Huawei unauthorized access to the carrier's fixed line network in Italy. Now this information is credible because Vodafone itself was using Huawei equipments at that point of time. And hence Vodafone had asked Huawei to remove those backdoors in home routers in 2011. And the third issue which might have irked the United States is an important issue of skirting of US sanctions on Iran. US accuses Huawei of running a Hong Kong based company known by the name of Skycom as an unofficial subsidiary to obtain US origin goods, technology, services, including banking services, which would otherwise have been prohibited to China. So US imposed sanctions on all those companies and barred all companies and corporations across the world for dealing with or trading with or within Iran. Huawei had to do that, and hence it is alleged that it formed a separate company based in Hong Kong to skirt the sanctions or get around the sanctions. So we have seen the responses by developed countries, and hence it becomes important for us to see what India's response is. In India, there has been considerable confusion among telecom operators on what to do about Huawei, especially when they switch to 5G networks. Although Huawei network equipment has been used by Vodafone Idea and Airtel in many circles, but the Chinese company has still not got a nod on 5G trials. Huawei and ZTE were barred from taking part in the trials initially. And there is no surprise in the fact that India's response is being closely watched across the world, especially given the current dip in Indo-China relations. Although recently India has allowed Huawei to participate in 5G trials, but it could not happen because of the pandemic. In between, the relations have dipped so much that it remains to be seen that what India is going to do and how it is going to approach this very, very pertinent issue. But overall, it is becoming increasingly clear that the decision on Huawei is not merely a technological or economic decision anymore, but it is fundamentally a geopolitical decision for most countries. China's decision to weaponize trade and technology ties might now come back to haunt it as other nations begin to pay back in the same coin. This next article, How the Tiger Can Regain Its Stripes, appears on page number 7. So you know that there has been a massive increase in the number of tigers from 2000 in 1970 to around 3000 currently. So India has done better than other range countries, but flags have been raised regarding the cost and efficacy in this particular increase. So in this regard, author highlights few points. According to the author, India has a potential to accommodate around 10 to 15,000 wild tigers as opposed to current 3,000. But it is not able to do so because of few reasons. So first we need to understand that why the number of tigers have increased. And this is because of two very, very important legal instruments or legislations which enable tiger recoveries in India, which is Wildlife Protection Act 1972 and Forest Conservation Act 1980. Also, a lot of social challenges were overcome both by political leadership as well as field officers. And these hurdles were mainly related to the inhabitants of those areas or regions which were later on declared as protected tiger reserve or national parks. And hence these challenges were overcome and tiger recoveries occurred, but that was only temporary. And also it was limited to only few tiger reserves. But there have been significant changes post 2000. There is a decline or a clear-cut decline in political commitment to conservation. And there is also a gradual transition of the field-oriented forest department to Indian administrative services. Also in the meanwhile, global institutions intervened to provide various kinds of models for the wildlife conservation which did not pay appropriate attention to the local needs. And also the populist movements for tribal rights led to the implementation of the Forest Rights Acts, which has again ensured human intervention or interference in the wildlife habitat. So a tiger task force was constituted in 2005 and it was formulated in the wake of a news coming from Sariska Reserve that the tiger had got extinct in this particular reserve. And hence it resulted in a report that created a tiger management model that benefited the forest bureaucracy more than it did the tigers. So for example, based on these recommendations, government began investing heavily but not intelligently in tiger conservation. Excessive funding of few reserves while neglecting large areas with greater recovery potential became the norm. Progress on voluntary village relocation schemes from within the reserves slowed down, and tiger reserve managers were soon attracted to massively funded eco-development activities originally formulated by World Banks. So within the tiger reserves, the focus from tiger conservation was shifted to eco-development. And another feature of this emergent government monopoly over tiger management was the lack of data transparency and rigorous independent tiger monitoring. Also, the size of National Tiger Conservation Authority has increased a lot. It has been assigned schemes totally unrelated to tigers, such as recovery of snow leopards and translocation of African cheetah, which was recently done. And hence in this regard, author suggests a few steps. First and foremost, the role of forest bureaucracy should be once again restricted to wildlife law enforcement and not for laws like Forest Rights Acts. Merging Project Tiger with other central schemes for wildlife conservation would be a good first step in this regard. Also, the government monopoly over domains of tiger conservation should be erased, and the vast reservoir of talent and energy in society should be drawn to engage with these diverse domains by involving private enterprises, local communities, NGOs, and scientific institutions. CSIR moots mega labs to boost COVID-19 testing appears on page number 1. Now you already know that there is a lot of backlog in the way we are testing right now. The demand for testing much outweighs the supply, and hence to speed up the testing as well as to improve the accuracy of testing for coronavirus positive cases, the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, that is CSIR, is working on developing mega labs where large machines, which will be known by the name of Next Generation Sequencing Machines or NGS, which are also used for sequencing human genomes, will be purposed or repurposed to sequence viral genome of COVID-19. So now in this regard, it becomes important for us to understand how is this better than RT-PCR. The details about RT-PCR has already been discussed in earlier DNS. You just have to go to YouTube search option and search Rao Zeiss DNS RT-PCR. You will find that particular DNS video, but also we'll give the link. So there are 3 reasons why this step would be better. Because first and foremost, this NGS is much more accurate than RT-PCR. Because these genome sequencing machines can substantially detect the possible presence of virus even in several instances where the traditional RT-PCR missed them. This is primarily because the RT-PCR test identifies the SARS-CoV-2 virus by exploring only specific sections of the virus, whereas the genome method can read a bigger chunk of virus genome and thereby provide much more certainty that the virus in question is indeed that particular virus for which we have conducted the test. So just to give you an example, that if this is the full sequence of the virus, then RT-PCR targets few sections. If those are found, it confirms that it is COVID-19. If those are not found, it turns out to be negative. But in case of genome sequencing machine, they are going to read the genome A to Z, and hence they are not only accurate, but they can provide the full evolutionary history. Because if any pair of genes change, then it will be visible in the full sequence, not when you are just going to identify certain locations in the whole genome. Also, in case of NGS machines, the number of ingredients which are needed is very less, and hence the sustainability of operations as far as these machines are concerned is much greater. So the question of the day for yesterday was, consider the following statements. Statement 1, the detailed provision and rules of AIA has been enumerated in the Environment Protection Act 1986, which is obviously incorrect. It utilizes one of the clauses of EPA 1986. Which one is that clause? And the statement 2 is correct because Environment Protection Act 1986 was indeed enacted in the backdrop of Bhopal gas tragedy. So the right answer is B. The question of the day for today is, Schedule 6 of Wildlife Protection Act 1972 deals with which of the following? A. Endangered animal species. B. Animal which can be hunted. C. Vermin animals. And D. Plant species of concern.